Hello everyone and welcome to a very special video. Today we're going to be talking about the design of my very sustainable garden in 2018. So back 2 years ago I made a video in the early days outlining some of my plans for growth for the next several years. I think that was through 2019 or 2020. And I've expanded on those ideas and I've kept true to much of what I had in mind. But you know, as you watch more YouTube videos and as you experiment in your own garden, you come up with newer and better ideas for the space that you have. So what you're seeing right here on screen is a makeup of my garden. It's about 35 feet by 35 feet. Looks a little wider in this picture than it does deep. That's just because the rectangles are a little off shape. I'm working in Excel. But that's neither here nor there. So let's get started. What you see here, the brown in the back and the right, so when I refer to back, that's the top of the screen, front is the bottom of the screen, left and right are left and right. The back and the right are brown lines. Those are two fences belonging to myself on the right and neighbors on the back. That green line on the right hand side is sort of a misnomer. I've got a permanent fence, a wire fence all the way around the inside of the garden. And I just wanted to represent that of sorts, but the right side of the garden isn't perfectly straight, it angles, and I couldn't really draw that here in Excel, so I just put that green line in as a representation. The purple line is the permanent fence that I'm mounting on the out-hand side. It's more aesthetic, kind of looks like a neat purple painted picket fence, and that'll be done later this month or in June. So let's see what's inside. Let's start on the left-hand side. This is going to be the perennial section. So the left 2/5 about are fruit that comes back year after year that I really don't have to do much to except for trim or maybe move some shoots from time to time. This raspberry color is the hedge of raspberries. You guessed it. It started out in the back a couple years ago, and then last year I transplanted everything, that row on the left and the row in the front. Kind of looks like an open staple. Those did so well during their first year, the left and the bottom. They're going to do great again this year. I have to get up my trellis on the left and the front. It's trellised in the back, and that allows me to get to the raspberries on the inside a lot easier. I'm so happy to see them here in the spring. They're greening up. I've got shoots coming up already. It's the very end of April, and it's just nice to have that border of fruit. Adding to the left-hand side here, these two green items. The backmost green represents the space where rhubarb is. The leftmost rhubarb kind of goes into the raspberries, but the thing about rhubarb is its season, so to speak, in my garden is done before the raspberries really get going. So the rhubarb grows, and I harvest it, and then by the time I'm really done using the rhubarb for the first harvest of the year, then the raspberries can take over. And then at the end of the year, the raspberries kind of die back when I get my second harvest of rhubarb. So they're planted really close together, but it works for them. And then the frontmost green section is where my gooseberry bush is. Now, it's not actually 6 feet wide by 3 feet deep. That's an approximation. It's more of a circular bush, but it takes up that area approximately. The light blue represents the sitting bench that I made a couple years ago. That was a really fun project made by 2x4s that my wife helped me paint. I liked it. I had it in this spot last year, and I'm going to keep it there because, I don't know, it gives me a good vantage point for the rest of the garden, and I just liked it. The brown spot in front of it is for my ground cherries. Now, ground cherries are perennial. I'm only going to let 4 or 5 plants come up and go to maturity, and that takes up a huge amount of space. If you've never grown ground cherries, they spread like a weed, and they're delicious, of course, but they take up that space. So I planted them there last year. They're going to come up. Never needed to plant them again. And with that, essentially, this is the whole left 2/5. Doesn't look like 2/5 in this picture. I realize that, but that's very sustainable. I never really have to do anything year after year. The rhubarb just comes up. The raspberries come up. The gooseberry gets green. The ground cherries come up, and I harvest, and we're done. and that's nice. I think that helps when you're trying to plan a long-term sustainable garden, is to incorporate those perennials. Because this is a big space. This is about 1,300 square feet, and it's nice to have just under half of it that you really don't need to think. It's autopilot. It's a high producer. There's a lot of variety around. The bees love the raspberries, and they fly around the rest of the garden to pollinate the annual vegetables on the right side, which we're going to see in a little bit. So it's terrific. And this was really the first thing that I was thinking about when I was thinking about planning a long-term garden, was I wanted a lot of sustainable perennials, especially the raspberries, because they're just our favorite. And now we get to a very special section. I'm going to be putting in permanent fixtures, some raised beds that I don't intend to move for a long time, if ever. So these first two items here, these are narrow beds. They're about a foot wide, and they're going to come up 6 feet. Now, the space where they are coming from is actually where the garden gate is. I've got a really nice purple door that swings over, and it's an arched trellis on the top. So these two narrow beds are going to be the beginning of my vine plants. We're going to see in a moment that this will extend further up. In these two beds, I'm going to plant an early crop of snap peas, and I'm also going to do beans and cucumbers. Let me move the picture up a little bit. I made a mistake when I was drawing this. I don't know why I made these 2 feet wide instead of just 1 foot wide. But essentially we continue this pattern up. And I've got 4 feet of spacing here. I think I'll probably adjust that to maybe 2 or 3 feet just for a walking path, probably 2 feet. And then extend this whole thing from the front fence line to the back of the trellis area to be about 20, 21, 22 feet when it's all said and done. So then, again, these are going to be 1 foot wide, narrow raised garden beds. And this is going to have things like squash and pumpkins and watermelon and cantaloupe and those kinds of things. Definitely spaghetti squash. Just the things that grow really well in our garden. And I've seen lots of videos on raising those, training them to grow vertically instead of spreading out, because they're vine plants and they want to go and go and go. So I'll be using some ties and experimenting with that a little bit more this year. I did on a small scale in the past. I've definitely trellised beans and cucumbers, but those have been lighter. I've done some small pumpkins, but never anything giant. So that's going to be a learning experience for me. But the neat part about this, I've said that it's going to be trellised. I'm going to be using some 4x4 gauge cattle wire, and I'm going to be creating an arch. So essentially you're going to be walking through this archway here of vined plants to get into the garden. It's kind of like this magical garden gate entryway. You open the door, and then the wire is going to mimic the arch on the door, and that's what you're going to be walking under. It's about 7 feet or so tall. I'm 6'5", so I like a little bit of clearance, but how cool is it going to be in the high time of the summer to be walking through, and there's going to be beans dangling above my head? I think that's going to be really fantastic. And then we get to the annuals. So these are 4 raised beds that are about 3 feet wide by 12 feet long. They take up all the rest of the eastmost space. And I'm really excited about this. We've been working towards this goal for the last 5 years. We have pretty dense clay soil here, which I've been tilling over the last several years, and it's loosened up because it's been mixing with the mulch and the compost and the stuff that we've dropped over the years, but it's still relatively hard. We haven't had much success with root vegetables. Our beets and carrots and things just don't want to grow in the clay. So we've been working towards getting these beds so we can do our chop and drop. I can just add nice compost to the top of it every year to amend the soil, and I don't need to disrupt the mycelial network of fungi and things underneath it. Just keep it pretty natural. So I'm excited about these raised beds. This is where pretty much all the vegetables are essentially going to be going. This is where we've got our lettuce and kale and Swiss chard and carrots and beets and tomatoes and peppers and eggplant and all that good stuff. There's plenty of other things in there, as well as herbs and some annual flowers that are going to be coming up. You know, want to encourage the pollinators all across the vegetable garden. Really looking forward to that. I'm building some boxes that are going to be about a foot tall. I'm using 2x10s with a cap of a 2x4 on top of it. It's a method, you know, there are so many different videos out there of how to build a raised bed, and the one that I like is very simple. It's kind of following the 1 yard revolution style. Patrick's model, he's another great YouTube channel. And I'll have another video of how I'm building those, my take on it. But the nice thing about these kind of raised beds is then come the colder times, I can build cold frames to go over them and extend our growing season several weeks in either end of the season. So I'm really looking forward to learning that process later this fall and in 2019 and beyond. But having these permanent beds here allows me to, you know, think ahead and be able to prepare for those things. I wouldn't be able to do that if I was doing an in-ground method. So there's a sacrifice with having these beds, not just for the cost, but for the permanence, because you don't want to move them around because they'll be very heavy. But I'm ready for it. So that red square on the right is the workbench that I built in 2017. That's not going to go anywhere. Underneath it is an old railroad tine that used to be, I don't know, just in the yard from the previous owners, and it's buried and it goes underneath the fence to the right-hand side, so I decided never to get rid of it. Anywho, the workbench is in a perfect spot. That blue section in front of it was just to change the coloration. I'm done with the raised beds. Those are only in the front section. So the circles, though, I've got a couple food-safe 55-gallon barrels, and I'm not going to have them the full size. I'm probably going to cut them in half or in thirds, and that's where I'm going to plant my potatoes this year. I've got several different kinds, and this will be really highly amended soil to be real loose and sandy, because potatoes like to have that area to grow. You know how they just spread out underneath. If you've ever grown potatoes before, I tried to grow a hillage of sweet potatoes for the first time in 2017, and it went surprisingly well, but in the parts that I didn't mound up high enough or hoe to get the ground loose, the tubers were, my sweet potatoes kind of looked like carrots. They were long and really dense and really thin, but some of them in the soil that was loose, they looked so good and they tasted delicious. So I'm really excited to play with that. There might be more barrels, more or less. I just put 3 on here, and that one at the very end of the arch walkway, that may move. I'm not entirely certain what to do there. The raspberries extend a little bit further to the right than they do in this picture, but I'd like to use as much of the space as I can. So I might put something else there. Who knows? And finally, in the back right section, I've got 4 different rows of yellow. That's to represent a couple alternating rows of corn and sunflowers. That'll be a new experiment for me. Really looking forward to it. My sunflowers are going to get, you know, between 10 and 12 feet tall, so I really want them in the back so they're not shading a lot of the other shorter vegetables in front of them. And the corn, of course, is going to get, you know, 7, 8 feet tall as well. The square patch in the back is where our zucchini goes. We do a lot with zucchini. Zucchini bread is one of my favorite things, and my wife humors me by making some delicious chocolate zucchini muffins and zucchini bread and everything else. And it's fun to give zucchini away to friends and family as well. So essentially, what we have here is a very close approximation for how my garden is going to look this year and in subsequent years to come. So this has been a great journey, and I can't wait to finish building my boxes. It's the 29th of April, and as of yesterday I just built the very first 2 1-foot by 6-foot ones in the entryway of the garden, and by the end of May I plan to have the rest of the trellisway done and the boxes on the right hand side there. So I've got a lot of building ahead of me, and I'll be showing videos on how I build them and what I'm filling them with in the garden, and then how I'm starting to plant. So have you done this kind of a process before? Have you drawn out how you want to map your garden or what it looks like from time to time? I'd love to see it. If you've got a Google link you want to share, it's always exciting to see how other people prioritize their space, or what they know about sunlight in the garden, how it affects everything else, or it's just really interesting. So this is my aerial view, and If you like this, I hope you follow along in the garden tours in 2018, and you can check out the ones from 2017, 2016, and 2015 to see how the garden has come and grown from year after year. And if you're watching this after 2018, I'm going to keep going year after year. So I hope this offers some inspiration to other people out there. You make a plan, you stick to it, you modify it, and you grow. Your garden grows, you grow as a person. It's a really wonderful experience. So thanks for watching. I hope you'll subscribe if you're new. Leave a comment below. And until next time, happy gardening. Bye.